Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Deirdre Mulkerrin. I'm IPA Queensland President, and my day job is I'm the Director General for Child Safety, Seniors, Disabilities, and a few other things. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon on behalf of IPA. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional lands of First Nations people, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this is their land, always will be, always was, always will be. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsor for this evening's Stewards on the Couch, our partner Luminary. So we're excited to announce Luminary has recommitted to not only supporting IPA for this next year, but has become a major sponsor and Stewards on the Couch series sponsor. So thank you, Russell and team. So this afternoon, it's my great pleasure to introduce our good colleagues here, and then I will try and corral some questions at the end. I've warned Dave that if there's silence in the crowd, they'll all be from me. So he's definitely looking forward to your questions, not mine. So sort of keep in mind what's being said, and there'll be time at the end for some questions. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our good colleague, Dave Mackie, who is our Public Sector Commissioner. Dave has 30 years of experience in the Queensland Public Sector, previously Director General of the Department of Justice and Attorney General. He's held senior executive positions within the Anti-Discrimination Commission here in Queensland, the Commission for Children and Young People and Child Guardian, and the Commission of Inquiry into the implementation of Queensland's health payroll system. I was going to make an inappropriate joke about Dave hasn't seen a commission that he doesn't like, but that would be wrong and inappropriate, Dave, so I won't say it. Dave has also provided stewardship of the portfolio entities within the Department of Justice and Attorney General, including the Crime and Corruption Commission, Office of the Information Commissioner, the Electoral Commissions of Queensland, Queensland Human Rights Commission, and the Queensland Family and Child Commission. So it was sort of right, like Dave's a bit fond of a commission. And now as Public Sector Commissioner, Dave is leading the development of a public sector which is fit for purpose. Public sector recognised for its contemporary capability, integrity, robust governance and dedicated service to the Queensland community. Dave's also an IPA Queensland councillor. It's also my great pleasure to introduce Professor Deborah Blackman, who will lead the conversation with Dave, who I'm sure actually will have much smarter questions than I will ask. So Professor Blackman is the head of school and Professor of Public Sector Strategy in the School of Business at the University of New South Wales, Canberra. Her research interests include public sector policy implementation, systems level change, employee performance management, organisational learning and organisational effectiveness. She co-edited the Handbook on Performance Management in the Public Sector and has published internationally in several high-ranking journals. Her primary interest is using systems to understand why things do not work when theory says that they should. And aren't we all interested in that? The common theme of her work is developing effective knowledge acquisition and transfer in order to improve organisational effectiveness. So I'd like to hand over to our guests. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And obviously my job is to try and ask some sensible questions or possibly some silly questions. We'll see how we go. But I think it'd be really good if we could just start to begin with, but if you can give a bit of an outline of your career and maybe some insights you've got in relation to the evolution of the public sector over what you assure me has been quite a long career.
Thanks, Deb. And thank you for the invite to be here today, and thank you for coming at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to see me. A bit daunting, but I really appreciate your attendance. Can I say there is certainly a gender bias in the room, which proves again that women are far more competent public sector employees who want to learn and develop. So thank you for coming very much at the moment. My career, like probably a number of people, wasn't planned. out of school, I studied at university economics and public policy, only really because I was pretty good at economics at school. And I went into the private sector after that, and I didn't really find it my liking, the private sector, for a whole range of reasons. So I thought I'd go to the public sector. I knew people that were in it. And back in those days, I had to go into the base grade level. And some of you may have heard this from another thing about when they used to have the exams out at the exhibition grounds. I don't know if anyone in the room sat one of those. You went out there with 1,000 other people, you did your exam, and then you waited to see if the government would ring you and give you a job. And it wasn't a job you actually applied for, it was a job. They'd put you in at a base grade in a department. I went into Department of Attorney General at that time, and Department of Attorney General and Department of Justice were actually split back then. It was right on the back of the Fitzgerald inquiry report coming out, and there was a number of raft of changes. I sort of started there by walking into the organisation and being told, here's your desk, here's what you're doing, which was actually in payroll, which I knew nothing about. And I used to fill out, and I don't know if there's anyone of this vintage in the room here, but there were big green A3 cards which you had to write everyone's pay details on, dates and times, and put them in little boxes in a code. And they used to take them off to SciTech, which used to be where the Reserve Australia Bank was, or the Office Works, I think it is now, and they fed it into a machine. That was my job, and I had a supervisor. If I put my pencil line out of that box, she'd smack me on the back of the hand with a ruler. And I thought, where the hell have I come? And this was in the early days, I guess, before internet and before mobile phones. It was a different world completely then. I think we forget how much people of my age and before my age, obviously, have really seen change, I guess, in the public sector. And that sounds like nothing now to anyone, but back then it was a huge change. And I can remember them setting up a computer in the Department of Attorney General back then with the information superhighway on it, and you could book a time to come and have a look about what it looked like. And I can still remember walking away from that thinking, this will never catch on. It's too complicated, and boom. And then we progressed. That technology that sort of came in then around the public sector then turned on us with the Y2K, whoever was around at that time. And we spent oodles of money and time and project teams for something that obviously never delivered at the end of the day. But since then, and I'll try to shorten these answers up, hopefully, Deb. Since then, I basically took every opportunity that then presented itself to me over my career. I didn't really say no to anything. I saw it as another opportunity to learn, because one of the things I didn't get, I think, when I entered the public sector was an understanding of what it does, how it works, what's my role, and what should I be taking pride in while I'm working here, and where can I go? No one really answered those questions for me. So I sort of did my own fact-finding and did many roles. In fact, I think I've done 15 to 20 roles in the public sector leading up to now. I've done every level that you can possibly do. I've done line agency work and finance and all those sorts of things to be well-rounded. I'm a little bit daunted today, and he's going to get a shock because I'm going to call it out. One of my first Attorney Generals of Queensland sitting in the room today, and Mr. Rod Welford. I remember that time well. I can't tell certain stories now because Rod's here, but it spans right back. I think Dean Wells was my first Attorney General when I came in. So times change very quickly. I think the one big difference we've got now is that social media and the mainstream media, which didn't exist back then to the extent it does now. Government used to be the bastion of information. If you wanted information, you had to come to government. And we had journalism that was probably described as investigative back then. That whole thing has changed now, and we receive so much information in government from social media and everywhere. Everyone's got an opinion, whether it's right or it's wrong or it's fact or it's fiction. And I think that's one of the most difficult things that we're challenged with trying to deal with at the moment while doing our jobs as public sector employees.
Okay, now slightly worried about asking this after you were so wise to realise that the internet would not catch on, but it makes you worry. But bearing in mind you have had that very long and varied career, what have you learnt about leadership over that time that you're bringing to this new role?
Leadership, very big topic. We could go out and all Google leadership values or leadership principles right now, and you'll have 30, if not more. You know, empathy, courage, honesty, integrity, blah, 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 blah. To have all them in spades is quite a remarkable thing, and I think it's really difficult to be in a leadership role because there is an expectation that you're bringing all of that with you. Leadership never ends in terms of learning about it, and I don't think you ever finish it. You'll retire before you've perfected leadership, because I don't think anyone really does. And I don't think all of those sort of things that I was saying before as leadership values are really pertain just to leadership roles. They pertain to every public sector employee around those standard things. But if I can, I guess, equate the greatest thing I think I've learnt in leadership, and it's something all of us miss out in those leadership positions, I think, all the time. Part of it is knocking down obstacles. Let me start again. As a leader, I think your main role is to support your people, not your people supporting you. And your job is to try to give them a clear playing field to go and do their job the best they possibly can. You knock down the obstacles for them. You equip them with the tools that they need to actually deliver. But I think if I equate it to a captain of a ship, it's one thing to be a leader and saying, well, I know I can recruit the crew, I can make sure there's food and water on the ship that they can sustain them, I'll have the best equipment they can row for, and then I'm going to navigate to make sure we don't hit the rocks or shark-infested waters and we're going over there, guys. I think the thing we often miss out is telling people why we're going over there. We say where we're going, we've got a vision, etc., but we don't really explain why. And I think the greatest thing that you can have in leadership is to give meaning to people's jobs. Why are they on that journey with you, and what's the value proposition for them?
Okay, we might come back to that in a little while, because I think that picks up with another word that's used a lot. We talk a lot about leadership, but there's a lot about stewardship as well. And so I'm interested to know, we hear about public servants and public sector being stewards and delivering the public good. So what does that mean to you in this role in terms of stewardship?
Well, I'll start back a little bit. The one thing I've come to realise working in the public sector all these years is most people engage with government because they need help, or they're vulnerable, or their life have got uncertainty, great uncertainty in it. And as public sector employees, we've got great powers to be able to change someone's world, whether it be for a day or a week, a year or forever, depending on what we do. If you think about what we deliver, we look after sick people, we fix sick people, we educate children, we provide people with an opportunity environment to resolve disputes, whether they be civilly, we prosecute perpetrators, we support victims. All of those things are incredibly significant in terms of people's lives. So if you've come into the public sector feeling that your whole purpose here isn't about delivering public good, you're going to struggle being in this environment for a long period of time. And I think that concept of stewardism, and it's not just the Public Sector Commission's responsibility, that it's every public servant's, is how do our people, how do our systems, how do our workplaces, how does it all focus in on making sure that we're actually looking after and taking care of other citizens out there. We live in this community as individuals, our families do, etc. So we've got a really important responsibility in terms of making sure that we're looking after citizens. That's sometimes really difficult to have on the forefront of your mind in your job every day. But I think that's something all of us have to really understand when we do our jobs, regardless of what job you do, to have a sustainable career in the public sector.
So that then comes back to the why that you were talking about before. It seems to me that that what you're saying is that for everybody to be able to do their job well, the leadership role is maybe about clarifying purpose.
Absolutely. And I think that it doesn't matter what job you do, whether it's in corporate services or otherwise, you are part of a system that delivers outcomes into the community. But I think public sector, and it's not just in Queensland, it's at all levels and all jurisdictions, we have that very vertical focus about the role that we do in a department. But there is a bigger system where all those dots join up that actually delivers something that actually changes someone's life outside of this room and outside of this building and all over Queensland. And to really, if you want to be a professional public servant, it's about having that in the forefront of your mind, regardless of what job you're doing. And for people in leadership roles, to give you that understanding of what the meaning is behind what you do. It's a thing I think not many of us, including myself sometimes, have done in their careers, give people meaning about what their job involves.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll probably come back there. One of the things that obviously I'm sure everybody thinks we're going to talk about, and so we will, is the Cultivate report, because in addition to being appointed the Public Sector Commissioner, you've also been charged with the responsibility of heading up the implementation of the recommendations from the report. And so, as you know, there's a range of findings that talk about integrity, frank and fair advice, transparency and accountability. They are coming up across many, many different jurisdictions, but they've also come up here. So, does it suggest that Queensland is broken?
No, it doesn't suggest Queensland's broken. the media would like to try to suggest that the Queensland public sector is broken in those assets, but we're not. And, you know, I think the thing, again, it goes back to the social media, it goes back to the mainstream media. All we ever hear about are the bad things. But, you know, we do hundreds of thousands, if not more, transactions and engagements with the public every day. And there's so many good news stories in there that we don't hear about because it's BAU for us. People only focus on the things that have gone wrong or the bad behaviour, and we usually hear that more than anything else. I'd probably also say, I think, you know, whether you want to call them public sector or public service scandals where people have been caught out doing bad behaviour, for my mind, to a certain extent, that's the system working. You don't see many public sector scandals coming out of Russia and China. So I think to a certain degree, it is the system here working. And if you're going to do bad behaviour in the public sector, at some point it will be purged. Maybe not sometimes in the timeframes that we would like, but it will be purged at some point in time. So, you know, the Coldrake report really firmed up a lot more, I guess, independence in a lot of the oversight bodies. That was a really big push to make sure there was enough scrutiny and transparency across the public sector, which, to be honest, I think we've got heaps of. You think of all the oversight agencies, your agency's got ethical standards. There's 290,000 public servants around the state watching each other. It's pretty hard to get away with something that's not appropriate for too long. So I don't think we're broken, but I think what the Coldrake report gives us, particularly when it comes to his recommendation around public sector rejuvenation, or whatever R word you want to use, because people use all different changing R words on this reform, reinvigoration, all these sorts of things. I think it provides us with a sincere opportunity just to reset the public sector in terms of some of the core things that I think our focus should be on. So do I think it's broken? No. Do I think it's an opportunity for us to go back and really revisit some fundamentals about being a professional public servant? Yes.
So that probably leads me to one of my favourite questions, which is, in that case, what does successful public sector regeneration look like to you? If everything goes well, what does success look like?
Well, it's a big answer to that question, I think, at the end of the day. But I think one of the fundamental themes that sits over all of this is about connectivity in public sector. Connectivity about how we look at running our workplaces, how we act as public servants, but also how do we integrate with each other in terms of delivering outcomes. And I think that's one of the system focus changes that rejuvenation needs to look at, is about that bigger picture about we're all in our departments doing our thing, but there's so much cross-integration in terms of what we do to deliver outcomes that needs to go right. And I think that's a really important part of it. We're sort of focusing on, and I think another key trait of leadership roles is to try to make the complex simple. So I guess this time around, every public servant's heard about rejuvenation in their career, or whatever you want to call it. And I think there is some level of cynicism in public sectors nationally and probably internationally, which COVID probably didn't help either in terms of you know, people's views on big government, etc. But there's so much in the Coldrake report which is really focusing on getting back to basics. And for me, we tried to keep rejuvenation journeys simple, really about going back and saying, we've called it under 3 Ws, the workplace, the workforce and the work, to try to keep it really simple and paradigmed in an easy to understand way. The workplace is about why are we an employer of first choice? Why should we be? Have we lost that narrative? Why, you know, it's going back and saying, well, why would you want to work for the public sector? Why would a kid in university who's studying law or, you know, child protection or whatever it might be want to come and work for the public sector as their first choice as opposed to their second choice? What's our value proposition in the public sector? I don't think we've sold that narrative well over the last, you know, 5, 10 years. I think that's an important part to go back about what we offer. And a lot of that comes back to public good, etc. Workplace conditions are one thing, but the public good that you can do as a public sector employee is quite amazing. In terms of a workforce, how do we keep rejuvenating our capabilities and our talents, not just for now, but for the future? We've got a lot of people in my generation and above who will probably be disappearing out of the public sector in the next 5 to 10 years. We have an ageing population, so there's going to be a big shift of people of my ilk out over that period of time. And then we've got the next generation coming through is actually having to work longer. And we were talking about that before, just off here, about what people's preservation ages are for superannuation. And they're high. So we're going to have people working in the public sector longer and a big loss of people with content knowledge going out the door over the next 5 years or so. How do we actually retool the people we've got here so that we can retain them and develop them for what capabilities are needed in the future? But I think also one of the greatest changes, whether it be in this industry or any other, is generational change. So how do we make the public sector sexy to young people to come in here? How do we treat them well? How do we see that they've got a career ahead of them as opposed to them disappearing after 3 or 4 years and being disgruntled because they can't move their careers on? And the last W around work is really about creating professional public servants. What does that mean? It is a discipline, being a public servant. It's actually a profession within whatever profession that you've got or may have got from university or otherwise. And it's a tough profession. It's full of change. You're full of directives and scrutiny, but you're still expected to give frank and full advice, have levels of integrity that are higher than the ones you might personally own at home. It's a tough gig, but no one really indoctrinates anyone anymore. Some departments do. I've seen some really good examples of that, about what a professional public servant means, how do you make a career out of that, and what are the disciplines that you need to do it.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting that you're saying that, because it was reminding me of the story from when we did some work and we were talking to some of the more junior people about, you know, what reward was to them. And all the senior people kept talking about money, but the junior people were talking about, I just really want to know where my work goes. I want to know what I'm doing, and I want to know how I fit. And that fits very much with what you're talking about here and the way we can be thinking about those things. And I guess then that leads me to ask you that you've talked about rejuvenation. Let's use that R word, as you said, there's many of them around. And you've also talked about systems level change. So making the complex simple is not that straightforward. No. So how are you actually going to try to support system level change? What's going on in your mind as to how this might work?
Look, there's lots of variables in how we do that. But I think going back the first part of rejuvenation is going back to understanding, again, what I was saying before about our purpose, and really to try to have a whole of public sector focus on that again, I think is a really important thing. I also think in terms of systems change, and we were talking about a little bit before, a lot of us come into the public sector and work in a department and stay there. And what we try to do is get promoted vertically. And for some of us that works, for some of us it doesn't. We get disgruntled because there's only so many chairs at the tables above and we leave. I think there's a real need in 2023, and particularly from a systems change perspective, for people to look at the public sector as an ecosystem workplace, where actually moving horizontally is a far more professional and career development than just trying to go upward in the department that you're in. And I think the other benefit for that, for the citizen and for the sector as a whole, is it's hard to do system change when you don't know how the system works elsewhere. So we know, I'll pick an example, youth crime, which I shouldn't pick, but I will. You know, the youth crime is a really complex system outcome at the end of the day, which is less about that tertiary end of the system around the punitive side through the courts and the corrections system and youth justice, etc. If we get to that point, half the game's lost. And we know that, and there's evidence to be based on that. The human and social services up the other end, the services that focus on dysfunctional families and how do you deal, you know, appropriately with those families is the real thing. But it's really hard to make that system connect if we don't have people that haven't experienced each of those systems and know how they fit together. And I think a lot of jurisdictions are trying to do this as part of public sector rejuvenation, or what they want to call about it. But to have a change in the way that we view our careers and have a change in the way that we go through a career in the public sector, instead of doing this vertical focus, is really trying to set up a system that has a horizontal focus, where I think a lot of people's careers, if that's what you're interested in progressing, actually go further and faster if we look at trying to get a more well-rounded public servant that understands systems across the public sector, because system change doesn't come from politicians. It comes from public sector at operational levels, actually connecting those dots themselves.
Okay, and when you think about that, I mean, which do you think which are the levers? What are the things that you want to push in the short term so that you can start to think about your short-term goals? And then which are the things you think are going to be moving for the longer-term goals that you're trying to achieve in the future?
Yeah, I'll be a little bit higher level and abstract about that, only on the basis that we're still consulting the sector around what should be in the 5-year strategy of public sector rejuvenation. And obviously it hasn't gone to cabinet or anything yet at all. But I think that the short term is really trying to get us, I go back to the same thing again, a collective understanding around purpose, which I think to some degree we've lost focus on in the public sector, and not just ours, other public sectors again, about putting the citizen at the front, the outcome at the front, and really working that backwards of what does it mean for our jobs. So I think really getting a socialisation across the public sector is one of those really important first steps about who are we, what do we stand for, what's our purpose, how does that relate to my job, what skills do we need going forward, and what disciplines as a public servant we need. I think the next longer term bit is how do we operationalise that? And that's the challenging bit. That's a really complex thing to try to do it from a sector wide. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute the Public Sector Commissioner is here going to be pulling all the levers on that. Agencies are responsible for that as much as we're setting up the frameworks to do that, but it's going to take buy-in across the sector with a really different mind sync, I think, than what we've had for the last 10 years or so.
I'm just going to push a bit on the purpose thing, and you knew I would, because so a colleague of mine many years ago started to do her PhD confident that the answer was culture, and the answer was not culture, the answer was purpose. That where there was really clear shared purpose, there was far more traction, they could get far more done, and particularly across silos and across different organisations. So how do you think, your view and from your experience from before, how do you create that? How can that be done?
Yeah, can I say from the start, I'm not big on saying focusing on culture, because I think
and that's why
that's an end product.
Yeah.
Culture is not something you can say, well, there's the one I want, and here we're going to do it. Culture is really the ramification of doing a whole bunch of things right. And whatever culture develops is whatever culture develops. And they're different amongst agencies, which you would all experience, particularly people who might have been across agencies before. None of them are wrong, as long as they're positive and they're delivering something out the back. But I think what we've lost particularly, and it's great for me to sit in rooms with other directors general or commissioners and we have this conversation around purpose and all this sort of future setting. But unless that trickles down to every workplace across Queensland through every layer of management, supervisor and otherwise, people don't feel the impact of it. So that's going to be the really challenging thing. I know you're looking for a definitive answer on that, but it's really about how do we get buy-in from senior leaders and every other leader down where we are saying the same things. And again, it doesn't have to, the ramifications doesn't mean every agency is the same by any means, because we're all different. The uniformed agencies are completely different. Mobility doesn't necessarily work for school teachers, etc. But I think, I go back to my original point that I made earlier, a different level of understanding what connectivity means in the public sector is going to be vital. How do we connect on all of those levels that we're possibly not doing on now? And that's through careers, that's through workplace, a whole range of things. So it's a big ask, but I think it's one that we will benefit from enormously, and so will the public, if we can actually go on this journey and we do have a shared understanding about what our public purpose is, and that is to serve the community.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And I'm an academic, so the answer is always it depends. You have to understand it. I've never wanted anything definitive in my life, so I'm fine. And in fact, yes, the more dependence, the better. And then maybe that helps with the next question. So you're kind of hinting at this already, but there's obviously going to be some quite big challenges to get the rejuvenation moving, to get to where you want to be. So what do you think are the key challenges that you're working with at the moment that you foresee? Yeah,
I think going back to the point I sort of made before, what I call permafrost, everyone's heard that term in the public service before. Change always gets so far down an organisation or the sector, and then it sort of fades out a little bit. It filtrates in workplaces. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge before, because I think a lot of public servants, not just in this jurisdiction but others, have heard the big bang about we're changing something or we're making something, and then it goes into a vacuum or it doesn't hit the ground, so no one really sees it. So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges, and I think we need to think out of the box this time around, how we do that sincerely. I think that's going to be one of the hardest missions involved in that. And I think, there's some new thinking that we need to do around attraction, retention and development of people. You might probably have understood now, I've said it about a number of times, I think mobility is a great thing. And until we adopt that sort of psyche as a business as usual approach in the public sector to develop people, to make them more well-rounded, to understand system connections, we're really not going to get there. And I think what we've experienced with the concept of mobility in the past has been a negative one. There would have been a number of people in this room that saw the mobility program, whatever they called it, a number of years ago now, which ended up with the concept that you give your underperforming people to go somewhere else. It was easier than performance management. That's not what it was designed for, but that's what it turned into. And I think we've wasted a golden opportunity because again, from my own career perspective, doing different things with different people in different environments, that experiential learning does so much more for you than you would realise. And it actually creates, without you knowing it, a whole bunch of capabilities that people start looking at as a more well-rounded public servant, particularly if you want to go into more senior roles, executive roles or otherwise. So I think that's one of the keys. There's many, and I don't want to sort of label what we're doing yet because we're still going through a process obviously here. But I think that's a really challenging piece of work that I don't know if any jurisdiction's got right yet, Deborah. But until we bring that as a business as usual positive approach to developing our people, I think we're always going to be challenged around that system level change.
And I guess in a way, a part of that will be, you talking about value proposition, is about trying to think about how the value works at all the different levels for the individual coming in, for the departments that they're working in, and for the wider community. Talking about your career, you've clearly done that a lot. So if you were going to say what's the thing that really you valued most from from every commission, I enjoyed learning that you did every commission, but from doing that, what has that helped you to do that you think others maybe can't do?
I think it's given me a great understanding about how valuable all the services that we deliver, what impact that has on people. I've done things before where you're really exposed to some of the most challenging lives that are out there in society. And when you get it right, you make a really big change. And I think from doing different things as well, I've been able to link up how what I'm doing now impacts on what I was doing 2 years ago because I understand the connection between it and it gives you better insight. Theory is a wonderful thing, but nothing is better than experiential understanding in my opinion. I had no plan to my career, I emphasise that again. So I didn't know that's the benefit I would get out of that at the time. I was just eager to learn and accepted everything. I was the Registrar General of Births, Deaths and Marriages. I had no thought of doing that in my life, but someone asked me to do it, so I went and did it. But that gave me a great insight about something as simple as what people think is getting a birth certificate or a wedding certificate or otherwise. The reasons why people get that are far more significant than the kid just wanting to join the football team. I think just by going into different environments and looking at what it means, what's the public purpose and value of doing that job, helps you longer term when you move around and you're doing other jobs. And all of a sudden you can see the system. And that helps in terms of sort of delivering change that's positive.
And maybe a slightly more specific question, but I think it goes with that, is that you've got a new Public Sector Act that's come into force in March. How does that fit with all of the things that you're talking about and thinking about at the moment?
Look, I think one of the greatest things that the Public Sector Act has brought, the reform of that Act, and there's a range of things in there. It's about greater permanency for staff instead of what we've been sort of living on, temporary and casual employment, giving more certainty in that respect. Greater focus on confidentiality of information in the government, which is an important thing. But I think the greatest thing it really does is identify that your experience, and we're talking about this more broadly about moving around and things, your experience, where you've come from, what you have done, is actually a capability that only you own. And it's about being able to look through recruitment and selection and other mechanisms to say, I recognise that capability. Really did away with the merit sort of selection criteria which we'd traditionally done in the past. And it's really more focused on suitability. And what you bring to the workplace, yourself, from your experiences, who you are, what community you might be, what cultural persuasion you might be, if you're First Nations or otherwise, there is a capability there that is unique that you bring as an individual, and we should be able to acknowledge that and use that to our benefit of getting, delivering public purpose in a whole range of things.
I mean, that's quite a big shift, isn't it? Because for many of the jurisdictions, they're still wedded to the concept of merit. So I guess I'm going to ask, why the move, and how is that really going to help, do you think? What is this shift?
Well, if I go back to one of the W's in the rejuvenation around the workplace and about what's our value proposition, what's our employee of choice value proposition out there, you can't have one if half the community can't see themselves working here because they don't have safe workplaces, they're not culturally appropriate, they can't see women in leadership positions, whatever it might be. Our public sector needs to mirror the society that we're actually serving. So I think the Public Sector Act reform brings that a long way to recognise things we've not traditionally recognised before, and having 54-year-old white males sitting here in front of you in these sort of positions, there needs to be a change in terms of our demographic and our capability, I think, going forward if we really want to deliver public purpose beyond 2023.
And you used the word safe workplace there. For you, what does that mean now?
Well, I used to love coming to work because when I first started, I was in this wonderful workplace where it was diverse. People came to work and they felt safe. It's actually, they could leave their problems at home and come to work and feel in a really supportive environment. And then I went to a workplace that was completely opposite. And the stark reality of the difference there shocked me about how that could be. Everyone's got a right to come to work and feel safe, and there's many versions of what that means for different people, what safe means. Respectful, have zero tolerance for bad behaviour, you're supportive, someone's interested in your career, someone's interested in supporting you, you're allowed to give ideas, you're allowed to be involved in trying to pick up solutions for things, etc. Unless you have workplaces that actually feel like that, it's very difficult to be your best at work and to bring yourself to work. So I think safe workplaces are just one component of what we need to actually build a public sector that's actually going to deliver better for outside, not just inside.
And thinking about that, I mean, a lot of the responsibility for delivering safe work, for value attraction, many of those things are actually not necessarily the top leadership that are trying to support that, but it's often the next levels down who are trying to support sometimes very big teams, keeping things moving. How are you going to be supporting them? What's happening for them, if you like?
Well, again, Public Sector Commissioner's only 80 people, so we're not pulling all the levers on that. We're going to be very much relying, and that goes back to one of the challenges about really getting deep level buy-in from the agencies around the sector. And I should say, some agencies do some brilliant stuff. So part of this journey is not about reinventing everything. It's looking about who's doing what well and how do you actually exploit that across the sector. Because again, I don't think we've shared those things enough around great success stories in terms of ways of doing that. I think the answer comes back to your question, Deb, about we need absolute deep level buy-in from agencies to sort of make that happen. And that's going back again and saying, how do we actually change the scene setting about what the public stands for, what it means about public purpose? And again, if you're not really a big believer in public purpose and you're here because you actually can impact upon other people's lives and the society that you live, you're going to struggle being here for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. We want people who want to make a career out of doing good for out there.
And I do think it's really interesting what you're saying about the positive stories, because so much of the time we do focus on all the things that have gone wrong. And there's quite a lot of groundswell at the moment about what they call positive public administration, which is trying to say the majority of the time government does a really good job, but they don't get credit for that. So maybe this is the time to start thinking about how do you change the conversation and how, and you know, so if you were going to pick maybe your favourite 2 stories of what does success or high performance look like that should be shared more, which 2 would you just pick at the moment? And they don't have to be current ones, but things you think help really tell a story.
In terms of actual things, I don't think government uses case studies enough, case examples of what good we do out there. We don't see it, and no one reports on it. I mean, I don't know anyone who can remember the last great story about government delivering for someone in the community. I've read a lot of stories about how we've failed them constantly. But, you know, again, there are a handful of things that go out there. So I think really getting a better understanding and a better narrative about success stories is going to be vital. And I think that's something agencies need to sort of really focus on. It's really hard to think about what the game changes are going to be. I think ultimate success looks like we're delivering outcomes better in the future because we've got greater connectivity at all levels internally. And that's a really difficult thing again to change. That's system change, that's what you're talking about. And that's a really complicated, challenging thing to do. And we don't have all the answers on that in terms of the Public Sector Commission. This is going to be a whole of government sector approach to how we do that.
Yeah, and it'd be really interesting to watch because obviously there's been a lot of discussion about whole of government approaches over the years and trying to think about how they work and when they work. And thinking about a couple of examples, they do tend to come back to shared purpose. So that does seem to be the narrative that's going through what you're talking about today. Bringing some of those things together, what do you think are some of the key pieces of advice you would give anyone who's interested in their career progressing into executive or leadership roles? What do we need to think about?
Yeah, I'm going back to what I said before a little bit. Take opportunities. Go and experience something different. And particularly if you think you're in a leadership management role that you've got it down pat, go somewhere else and try what you were doing where you were. And sometimes it does not work. And the only way you can develop that is by experiencing new environments with new people, with new challenges, with new services. If you can be on projects, be on projects. If you can be on committees, be on committees. If you can do an exchange, do an exchange. Again, there is nothing, I think, that teaches you more than experiential learning in those sorts of circumstances. So I think one of the key things is become well-rounded and understand the systems that you're working in, not only your own, but other systems, because it goes back, I think, to what we were talking about before. At some point when you do that, things become a little bit clearer about what system changes need to occur than when you sit in your own sort of area for a long period of time.
If I can ask you you've clearly done lots of different things. What's the one that surprised you the most? Which of all the jobs you did was the least that you were expecting when you got there? You just went, okay, that was not where I thought I was going to be.
Gee whiz, that's an interesting question because I've done very different things over that period of time. I'm going to use the example again of Register of Births, Deaths and Marriages because I went in there thinking, my God, I'm going to be producing certificates. But it was as far from that as possible. Every certificate, every change of name, ultimately change of sex, has a story behind it, and a lot of them aren't great positive ones. It's not always just the mum getting the birth certificate so the kid can start school or otherwise. There's some really deep-seated issues, and I didn't realise, wanting a birth certificate or whatever it might be is such a fundamental life changer for some people out there till I got there. And then once I understood that, we could start thinking about what more can births, deaths and marriages do than stamp pieces of paper all the time. We've actually got far more influence than what we've been doing traditionally. How do we actually develop that? And again, that was from looking at something that I'd never seen before and coming with another mindset from some place that I worked to say, we can do some stuff potentially differently here.
Okay, thank you. So, obviously you've talked about quite a few things this evening, and we've picked up mobility matters. But are there any other key takeaways that you'd really like to say if people were just going to listen to the last 2 minutes of this on a repeat? What's the thing you really want them to hear?
I think it goes back again to, as a public sector, unless we're putting people first in terms of helping people in society fix their problems, which is a very basic narrative of what we do, I know, but we're here to help people who are coming to us for help, whether they're vulnerable or something big has happened in their life. Unless we can really try to keep that in the forefront of our minds and have conversations at work about that, and the emphasis on people in management leadership positions to probably stimulate that, to sit down and really understand how that job that you do leads to something that actually impacts someone's life out there in a positive way, we want. We're not really doing the job yet. And if we're here, as you've said, Deb, if you're here for the pay, if you're here for the permanency and the stability the public sector provides you, etc., that's not the full, that's just a job. It's not a profession. But we live in a world that really is a profession about public service, and it takes a discipline and an understanding to do it. I would love the public sector as one of the key things we do when we start this journey is to start having those conversations about what does that look like in your world with what you do.
I think it's really interesting when you talk about conversations, because one of the ways that we can actually start change, systems level change in fact, is by changing the conversations. And if we keep having the same conversation, then it can't shift. So I guess one of the things to be interesting for me to hear is how these conversations go as you move forward, and how you manage to move the conversations so that there were different ones happening, so that we can see.
And I think that has to happen, throughout agencies as well. It's not going to be a central conversation. It's going to be very much a devolved conversation.
Yeah, but I mean, I will just say, if you've had the same conversation more than twice, and that's meetings as well, by the way. There's ones when it's just like Groundhog Day. There's no point. You have to change it in some way. So it will be fascinating to see how that all goes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, this is the time for audience participation. So if there was something that Dave has said that you thought, what the hell was that? I don't understand. There wasn't a lot of that, Dave. But if there's something that you're really interested in engaging with Dave about, or you have a question about where we're going, now is your time. Or you will subject Dave to my questions.
No, you've got through.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Angela. I work with Luminary. Keen to really get your views around how mobility can be far-reaching. So, for example, we have lots of conversations with executives across our roles talking through the benefits of mobility to create that rounded public service executive. How do you see changing that mindset around moving laterally and transfers at levels and some of that older school thinking about transfers? How do you see that coming to life to create a more vibrant public?
Yeah, it's a challenging one, and I think the concept of mobility is simple, but the operationalisation of it is very difficult. And other jurisdictions, I think, are experiencing that too. I know Gordon DeBrow, my counterpart at the AFP, at the APS level, is looking at the same thing. Haven't seen what they're doing yet. Very interested to see how that works. I don't think that period of COVID helped us in any way. We got light on capability, the hollowing out, etc., and agencies started cannibalising each other. And you saw some people jump to pay levels in a matter of 6 months because everyone was trying to grab everybody. But anyone who's worked in the public sector for a period of time, the same people come back again. And so, we really need a change of thinking around that. It's an investment to let someone go. They're going to land somewhere and do something great and better in the public sector.
Suitability has dramatically impacted that. So
exactly.
From different environments come in under that change.
Yep. And I guess I don't want this centralised system where we're keeping a register and moving chess pieces for other agencies. I think it's got to be organic and natural, and agencies should be, in a perfect world, an organic process by which that is BAU, and people can put their hand up and say, I want to, and agencies actually help them do that by having discussions with other agencies. And I don't think it's even, perfect world. I don't even think it should be limited to government agencies. We should be able to have partnerships and arrangements such as about career progression with NGO sector, with private enterprise or otherwise. And in a perfect world, you don't lose all your entitlements for going and doing that. You can actually come back, it's fluid. But we're all benefiting. So that's not an answer because it's a challenging question about how that's going to be possible. But I think one of the things, it's a huge change in my thinking.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a choice of microphones. You can amplify, do two at once.
Okay, look, my question is, so I come from a very long family of public servants going back 150 years. Look, my great-grandfather, he actually drew the border between China and India, the McMahon line. He was involved in that. He was a surveyor. He went out in the Himalayas and stayed on the ice and all that. Anyway, these days what I see in public sector, we don't see, like surveyor generals or people of that caliber. They are, more careerist and sometimes they bring in, like that private sector mindset to it, which is really damaging because the citizen, they cannot, they don't have the power against the corporation, or the capital. So what they do is they put their power behind the government, and the government is supposed to, protect their rights and, and their interests. Anyway, so what happened, why has it, become that, like we see in public sector, people who are basically, on secondment from private sector, and it's just not very transparent. That's one. And two, I've seen a great I personally have a legal mind, but I see a lot of people in public sector, they don't understand how government works, what constitution is, what the the two Senate and Parliament and all the thing works. For example, during COVID we saw in Victoria, like there was this saga around private security guards being employed for hotels, and then they were looking for, okay, who's the culprit, who did it? I think, oh, we don't know. The health minister was, I don't know. Was it the secretary? Like this should be very straightforward. You just have to follow the line of accountability and just say, that'd be you, my friend, And there was this big thing about, we don't know who it was. So why is this occurring? Why don't people, people don't understand, for example, even with The Voice, people ask questions, like, what is it? How does it work? And like, oh, well, it's just a good thing, like, come on, tell me how the mechanics of it work. So that's lacking. Anyway, that's one part of my question. Second part is, sorry.
I'm just trying to remember more.
Yeah, I think we're up to three.
Second part is, I don't work in public sector, but I have always wanted to. But I'm kind of pigeonholed in project management, engineering and stuff. And it's very hard to break out. So your advice for someone to break out from there and be sort of, a general administrator and get into that, because that's something I really love.
So Dave, maybe start there and work your way back.
I might start from what I remember and work going.
Okay.
Very good point about, and I think that was in Coldrake's report, this is going to the capability that's coming outside and we're bringing it in. I think we've all been through periods of time where the latest thought bubble is the public sector should be more like the private sector, and they've brought people into quite senior or leadership positions who are from private enterprise to turn the public sector around and privatise it basically to a certain degree. We've seen the concepts of contestability. We've seen the concepts of outsourcing, etc. None of it's really worked, and they're different systems. This is my perspective anyway. They are very different systems and they're built on very different paradigms, and it goes back to the public good aspect again. The public good doesn't have a bottom dollar, which is driven by others. Private sector has sometimes, I think, better, customer focus around various things, but it's all at a price. The motivator isn't the customer service, the motivator is the profit, and that's why the customer service so much is spent on it. We're a little bit different in that context, but we've got a lot of room for improvement. So do I think that private sector concept works here? No. And in my career, I've seen many people brought in from the private sector. None of them are here now. One of two things goes to your other question. They don't really understand the system that they're working in, and they either get it wrong or they get frustrated. So that goes back to your other point, which I think part of the reset or the refresh or the rejuvenation, whatever it is really looking at again about when someone comes into the public sector, how do we indoctrinate them? How do we induct them? How do we give them what they need to know outside of their job that helps them understand the public sector more broadly, what agencies do, the cabinet process, the parliament process, to give them context in terms of how their work fits in. We haven't done that traditionally very well, unless you're a CLO in an organisation or otherwise. So I think that is certainly one of the focal areas that we really need to build a better public servant when they come in here, is to give them that context and understanding about how it all fits together. There was a third question.
Pigeonholed. If someone is pigeonholed, how do they get into?
And sorry, did you say you're in the public?
I'm not. I've worked in water utilities, so semi-private, but I'm talking about like government of Queensland. How do you get into that? If you spend 15 years outside in local government, private enterprise, water utilities, and you want to get into public sector,
That's your suitability, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's about suitability. I mean, there's no easy answer to that one, other than, I'd like to think, particularly in the public sector, going back to what we were talking about before around mobility, etc., is to have a socialised environment of BAU where you can go and have that conversation with your manager or your boss, and instead of them saying, no, I want you to stay, they actually help build your way through and way out and support your development through some form of exchange or transfer or whatever it might be. We're not there yet. We're very protective around our capabilities, and again, I think COVID was one of the catalysts for that, because we were deprived of capability in a whole range of areas, so we just fed off each other for a period of time. I think that narrative really needs to change from this year onward.
Thank you. Robin?
Hi.
I'm thinking about the next generation and the kids that are coming through, the young ones that are coming through at the moment. I don't think that there's a negative perception. I just think they don't think about it. So how can we change that? How can we change it so that they can go, so I can become a doctor, I can become a dietitian, which is very good. I can become a physiotherapist, a lawyer, or I could work for Queensland government. So how do we make that so much more appealing and fun, and find the meaning in that they really need?
Yeah, and you can be all of those things and then a public servant as well.
Yes.
Look, it's a great question. I don't think government has really got the right narrative, hasn't had it for some time out there about the public sector and the benefits of it and making it a sexy place to work. I don't think we've probably partnered deeply enough with universities and vocational institutions about how do we work with you more to actually direct traffic this way? How do you actually sell, before you're out into the world and working somewhere else, how do you actually sell the public sector? Yeah, and what courses and other things can universities do to actually orientate someone who, if they do come into the public sector, they've actually got a really good grounding in it before they actually even get here. So it's a great question. I don't have all the answers for that. I think there's a narrative change. I think we need to talk about the public sector through different channels in different ways that we may not have done before. But I think we need to reach out there and partner with others, such as universities and vocational institutions, about how do we create feeder clubs for the public sector.
And if I can just say, I think it becomes part of the mobility thing, because actually it's really hard to get internships, for example. So if you want to try and get people experience and things like that, it can be quite difficult to do that with the government departments. There's always terribly good reasons. The answer is always, oh yes, that's great, and then 97 really good reasons why it won't work. So that I think fits with that as well.
If I could just add, Deb, I think we've got graduate programs and there's different ones. There's the central one and then agencies have got one. Some of them are great. Others, I find we get them in, they're very excited about being here, but then that's sort of it. And probably after getting a bit of experience for a year or two, they leave and go and do something else. So I think we've got to be far more forward thinking about having an intention. If we're bringing people into the public sector, how do we build a future for them that they don't want to leave, and we actually develop them? Because we're going to need them.
We've had one of them from you, and they were so good. She was so good. She's now in the UK.
Yeah.
She's still with us
Yep.
in the UK.
Yeah. But again, I think part of that also is, it's tough times for young people out there now, cost of living in houses, etc. One of the real challenges is how do you build that whole concept of working here for the public purpose focus and what it can achieve, as opposed to just the dollars. It's easy to say that, but because everyone is interested obviously in how they're remunerated at the end of the day. but you really want people in here that want to stay because of what they can do.
It's really good for their well-being.
Thank you. Actually, I've got a question from the lectern. I'm just going to mess up the process now, Dave. So one of the big themes that Professor Coldrake talked about was the relationship between the public service and executive government.
Oh, she's going there.
I am going there. And I think that what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, looking at our Commonwealth Australian government colleagues, like everybody, I woke up and read the story about one of the secretaries and the back channels, and I have no idea whether that's true or not true. So I'm making no comment about that. But I think what it has done is kind of enlivened that discussion again about the role of public servant and executive government, and what's the expectation, what's your advice about how do we fulfil that role in the true sense of being a public servant, for the government? Yeah,
it's a really topical one. We've got prime examples of that now out there through robo-debt and otherwise. And you can go back to the point where, the contracting system came down the executive echelons of government. At the time, that was an accusation that by putting people on contracts that have a termination clause for no reason is politicising the public servants. But that again comes down to being the disciplined professional public servant that we want to develop at a very junior stage of their careers, so when they get into positions of senior leadership or otherwise, they have got that discipline and resilience to give frank and fearless advice. And I think there's a whole bunch of nuances to all of this. The media, for example, if a minister doesn't follow public sector or public servant advice, they're wrong. It's a crime. That's not true at all. A minister can disagree with public service advice whenever they want to. It's good to have a good reason why and sort of state that. But we can't control the political executive arm of government. Our job is to give that good advice based on our experience and understanding. That can be rejected, and if it is rejected and we go a different way, our job then as professional public servants is to then implement that policy the best we possibly can, with a focus on what that means for the community. We've got to have a system where we don't tolerate inappropriate behaviour, and departments through senior leadership that support people if they call it out, if that's occurring. So it's very easy to say that, but I think that's part of the journey that we need to be on as part of reinventing who we are in the public sector here, is to have supportive departments that actually hold and support people who call out bad behaviour. And I think we've just had that PID review, public interest disclosure review by Alan Wilson did at the moment, with some recommendations coming at the back of that. I don't think government's fully responded to that one as well. But as part of that, it's about what's in there that actually makes sure that we protect people who blow the whistle on inappropriate behaviour, and they still have opportunity to work in the public sector longer term. So I think that's going to be a really interesting piece of work that comes out of that, how government responds and what things are actually put in place to provide those protections.
Thank you. Deborah Wilson from On Talent. Just going back to your systems thinking, 290,000 employees is a big journey, a lot of people to take on a very big journey over a long period of time. What organisations, public or private around the world, doing it well in your view?
It's a good question. I don't know if anyone's cracked it by any means. I can't give you a definitive answer on that. We're certainly doing the empirical research behind that, the team, having a look at what's played out across other jurisdictions, what other things have done. This one's going to be an experiential journey in its own right, I think, at the end of the day. So, I don't know if anyone's actually cracked it in terms of what that looks like, because it also depends on what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. And I think every jurisdiction has got its own particular issues. I think 290,000 people is a big ship to turn, but that's going to come down again, I think, to absolutely devolved buy-in from agencies and public servants at all levels. And I think the other side for that for Queensland, which is different for us, is our regionality and our dispersed population out there. Because I think even mobility needs to go to the fact that it shouldn't be just South East Queensland that is the recipient of that capability and experiential learning. How do we bring regional centres into this so people in regions have opportunities in other environments, and certainly people in South East Queensland have opportunities in regional environments? So I think that's going to be a challenge too.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
That's okay.
I have just a question related to planning public service in the room. Quite loud anyway, to be honest. What would be your advice about the one thing you'd like them to start doing from tomorrow to make a difference?
Look, I sound like a broken record. I'd like people again, because I think the heart of starting on any... Yeah, I know it's one. I know the heart to starting this journey at all is really redefining in our heads what our jobs mean in terms of public purpose. So, and I don't think enough of us spend the time to try to think that through. You know, otherwise we're coming to a job and coming to an office every day and we're going home and we're spending... No one really thinks, I think, deeply around how does our job intersect with delivering something really important for someone out there. And it mightn't be... Sometimes your job's too far away from the front line maybe to see that, but it has interplay and it's a component of a bigger system response that's actually doing something. So I think resetting our minds about why are we here and what are we doing and how does it actually deliver something good for someone else is the starting point with all of that.
And
I don't think we did enough thinking about that.
Yeah, and can I just say something, which is also try and make sure that you're having the same conversation, right? Because many of you will be in a room all talking about something, all with this touching faith that you're all having a conversation about that thing. And you can't do it all the time because it'll become too boring, but it's quite useful every now and again to ask people, if whatever this thing is we're talking about is working, can we just write down what that will look like? And I say write down because then you actually get a picture of what's in each person's head. And that's when you realise that if there's 8 people in the room, you've got 8 different pictures of that thing. And you can then talk about those differences. And that becomes a different conversation from one you've had before, because you all assume that so like mobility, right? There'll be lots of people having meetings about mobility, and for each of them it'll be a different thing, unless they've made a point of listening to David. So just a comment is actually, one of the things to do is make sure that you're all actually talking about the same thing, because 99% of the time we're not, but we're very firm about that.
Sorry. Back. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. My name is Catherine, and we're from the Policy Future graduate programs. I do have questions about, like, you mentioned a few times about like going horizontally and trying to get experiences elsewhere. But how do you strike a balance between having a wide range of experience and technical skills? Because it seems like as graduates, we're coming out from our bachelor degree, master degrees, having some sort of technical skills. How do we use those skills to get a job? Probably the first thing.
No, it's a great point.
Also, sorry.
Oh, that's right. Two-parter again.
And saying that, like, if you could go back to your career journey, like in your junior roles, how did you like face the challenges of possibly going to a different department, a different team, and navigate yourself around like that environment where you have to learn probably a lot of things all over again?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think the heart of your question comes down to there are 290,000 individuals that work in the public. I'm using your figure, I think it's around 284, but I'm going with 290. There's 290,000 individuals who want to do and have different career aspirations, and as the public sector we want to try to cater for all of that. Some people want to stick in their professional or technical role, and that's fine. One of the things I think also we'd be looking at as part of the rejuvenation journey would be about how do we actually harness capability in certain areas, whether it be law or anything else. How do we use that through better capability hubs in the public sector? So people who want to stay in their technical or professional field, how do they move around potentially differently the public sector than people who are just open to getting other experiential learnings and capability development? So I think that's something, because we know not everyone wants to go into even senior management and leadership roles. And when you do go into senior management and leadership roles, I think another important thing is you've got to find space to learn that. And I think I've seen in the past, and I'm not picking on lawyers, but I've seen, and more than just lawyers, I've seen people advance very quickly. You know, we're talking about that vertical and horizontal. Seen people promote very quickly on their professional and technical skill, and within 5 years they've gone up 3 levels, and then they've hit that senior management leadership role, and because they haven't had a wider range of experience through other opportunities, they're not really equipped to go into that role. And people technically who find that space of leadership without having a journey of developing their leadership default to their old, what they're good at, which might be law or otherwise. I'm sorry, I'm not picking on lawyers, but I'm just using that as an example. So I think we've got to try to cater for everyone's journey, what they want to do. Some people don't want to go into leadership. Some people want to do standard hours, but have a rewarding and meaningful job to do. Other people want to seek leadership. So, it's a real challenge, but how do we cater for all of those people, I think is going to be part of what we look at.
So last question. Over there.
Thank you. You started by reflecting on the gender balance in the room and that there were more women than men. And that, of course, reflects the public sector statistics overall. You also talked about taking opportunities and being mobile, all of which are things that have sometimes been more difficult for women in their careers than for men. I'm wondering if you think that the public services structures and the way that it works have changed enough to accommodate the career pathways of all the women that make up the public service.
Great question. And I should say the Special Commissioner for Diversity is in the room. So where's Linda Colley? Oh, right in front of me.
I was going to say,
So I want to answer on her behalf because Linda's been doing a lot of work in this. But I think that dynamic is changing. And I think statistically we've probably got some empirical evidence there, Linda, that suggests that. But certainly that's part of, we want to see people who want to work in the public sector can see themselves in the public sector. It's really important. And particularly in those leadership positions where there is an opportunity to have their influence on what the public sector looks like going forward as well. So I think we're making headroads into that to some degree. We've got a long way to go, but certainly we've come a hell of a long way from when I started, when there was still white long socks walking around the place and a pair of beautiful little safari shorts. But I think there's a lot more to do as well in that end. So that's not really an answer for you, but I know statistically things are changing. And I think a room like this is a great indication about women who are really serious about the profession of public sector delivery and really interested in how they can continue their careers in something that's really rewarding.
so can you turn this off because I have to cough?
Thank you. I think that we're going to wrap that up. So can you join me in thanking again, Dave? And also thank you to our sponsor, Luminary. So just 2 other announcements from me. First is I'd like to announce that our 2023 Irene Longman oration, that's quite a mouthful to say, will be delivered by Rachel Hunter. So we've asked Rachel, the DG of Premier and Cabinet, to deliver our oration this year, and we're delighted that she's accepted. So Rachel will be speaking about the theme public service and public policy, and will speak to the role of public servants and the wider service community in delivering public purpose outcomes for the community. This will be a legacy speech on courage, leadership, innovation, authenticity and humility in public service work. She'll also be talking about mindsets and ethos and the essential craft of the contemporary public servant. So it'll be an invitation-only event, so please look out for the invitation in your inboxes. And finally, just encouragement for you to stay and network, and particularly come over and ask Dave all of those really difficult questions that you were trying really hard to hold on to. Unleash that. Feel free to come up and sort of harass Dave as much as you want. It's the script, Dave. It's what I was asked to say. Can I again thank you all for giving us the time this afternoon. We hope that you've enjoyed listening to Dave and Deb talk about the world ahead, and please join us outside. Thank you.